Good afternoon, everyone. We will wait for another 2 minutes before others join.
Should we make a start, Nessa?
Yes, please do, Anna.
2 minutes past. So welcome everyone to Microlink's Great Change, Great Women webinar series with this week's star, Diane Lightfoot, CEO of Business Disability Forum, and a very close friend of Microlink's. We all love Diane. Very thrilled to have her here today.
Thank you, Anna. It's very kind.
Very tired, Diane, but at least you're here, right?
I am here. I was going to say I'm fresh from my global symposium. I think fresh isn't quite the right word, but I'm delighted to be with you here. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Nasa. Microlink are indeed great friends of BDF. I'm not sure I'll live up to the great women billing, but well, I'll do my best.
Yeah, you are one of the greatest, and I've always said that, and I will carry on saying it. And thank you. And it's a really privilege to have you here so soon after your very successful symposium. I managed to watch most of it, and I certainly enjoyed it. And I think it's so informative. And you are an amazing speaker. I've never stopped saying good things about you, but certainly every time I watch you, I'm even more impressed. So,
thank you, Nessa.
And you're so good at summarizing things. So amazing. Just bring the points.
How do you do that? You're gonna have to tell me how you do that, because you're listening to everything and then you just go the important parts and then summarize at the end. Or is someone doing it for you and giving you
all my own work. I make notes. I make lots of notes, but yes, I like doing it. Thank you. Well, I really enjoyed it.
It's a skill. So anyway, I have my structure, which I have to follow. So Diane Lightfoot is CEO of the Business Disability Forum, a not-for-profit membership organisation that supports businesses of all shapes, sizes and sectors to get better at recruiting and retaining disabled employees at serving disabled customers. Housekeeping section, there will be a Q&A at the end, so please put any questions in the chat. Please be respectful to all others. We want everyone to feel welcome, safe and respected. Accessibility features our captioning service provided by MyClearText. Thank you very much, MyClearText. If you want to switch on the captioning, it's at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Closed captioning shows subtitles, and you can follow the conversation on social media, #GreatChangeGreatWomen. I'm now going to read Diane's many accomplishments. So Business Disability Forum's 350 plus members employ 20% of the UK workforce and range from FTSE 100 companies and central government departments to technology, transport and construction companies, retailers, higher education and other public services. Diane is the co-chair of the Disability Charities Consortium, chair of the Disabled Students Stakeholder Group and chair of the Challenging Behaviour Foundation. She also sits on the Civil Service Disability Expert Advisory Panel and the Institute of Coding D&I Board. I didn't know that.
Which bit?
The Institute of Coding's D&I Board. I didn't know that. I didn't know there was an Institute of Coding.
There is.
Well, and it's trying to get more funding at the moment, actually. And it's we all agree it's badly named, but it's trying to get people from different backgrounds to work in tech, not just coding. So yeah, so obviously I was involved in it to try and encourage more disabled people to have a career in tech.
Well, send me some information on it, because I have a lot of people in my network. I can send it round, and I mean, I didn't even know it existed, the Institute of Coding. It sounds like something from Harry Potter.
It does, doesn't it? It does, rather. It's not quite that exciting, unfortunately, but yeah.
So I'm going to ask the first question before NASA gets a hold of you. So tell us a bit about your role at BDF and what you do.
That sounds like it should be an easy question, doesn't it? But actually, it's quite a difficult question. I think, what do I do? So I've been at BDF for just over 4 years. I joined in February 2017. And obviously, as a CEO, I dabble in everything. I have my finger in all the different pies. But I suppose my role is really promoting what we do as an organisation, and perhaps more importantly, raising awareness of the issues facing disabled people in the workforce or trying to get into the workforce. That's equally as important, and as consumers, and making sure that we really fulfill our purpose, which I often describe as being like two sides of the same coin, one of which is providing really practical support and advice to the businesses we work with, and making sure that is tailored to their needs. And it isn't just a theory. So we don't just talk about the best practice and what you might do if you had all the resources and everything was perfect, but actually trying to be really pragmatic about what an organization can do.
Hands-on.
Exactly. So. And around that, really importantly, we take the view that organisations who want to be part of our membership and want to work with us, want to get better. So wherever they are, we support them. We never ever go down the route of telling people off or naming and shaming or anything like that. We just try and support people to develop and get better wherever they are, however long they've been doing it.
Solution focused. And
absolutely.
And what's the procedure? So it's a membership. So you pay
it's a membership
yearly.
Yeah, so you pay a yearly subscription. We have 2 main tiers of membership. So the majority, we've actually got, I think, coming up to 390 odd members and partners now, and included 46 partners. So those are like gold members, and very proud to have Microlink as one of our partners. And then we have our kind of core membership. We also have a new small business membership, which is part of a new project that we're running with City Bridge Trust called Smart London SMEs. And the City Bridge Trust is funding us to provide free support and advice to small businesses in London. So that's really exciting as well. So it is that really practical advice. It's also access to peer support. So we find that one of the things that businesses really value is a safe space to connect with others and to share what's working, and probably much more importantly, what isn't working. And that whatever issue you're experiencing, almost certainly someone else in the room or the virtual room will have experienced it too. And in those forums, I'm always struck by the candor and also the generosity in sharing experiences and really wanting to collaborate and work together. It's always actually quite humbling as well as inspiring. And NASA joined me yesterday. We had a roundtable as part of our global symposium, which Ian Stewart, as the HSBC UK CEO, co-hosted with me. And just the sharing, obviously, I won't say what people said because it was Chatham House rules, and just that feeling of a safe space was so important in enabling people to freely discuss. And that's, of course, how we then are able to move forward and innovate and learn.
Policy and advise and guide. And because I mean, we're all in this together, right?
Absolutely.
I actually, when I joined 2009, as a partner, there was one evening in Barclays, and all the CEOs were around, or senior execs, and it was a dinner it was amazing that at the time, the chief financial officer for RBS was talking to John Varley, the chairman of Barclays. At the time, they were actually fighting over this bank in Holland. So I mean, they were so cordial and very friendly, and talking about disability. That was the core thing, that they were all talking about the one common issue: how do we fix this problem? So you're right, the sharing is amazing, and they're so open, and they're so also admitting about the things they can't do, and can somebody help them to do it? So yeah, you're right. It's such an amazing feeling to be among those business leaders who don't hold back. They just admit what they need to learn, And people like you help them to learn it.
Well, we certainly try. And what also always strikes me is how much they care, the senior leaders around that table. And of course, you know, by definition, organisations that are our members and partners are kind of the converted, if you like. But the fact that there are really senior people who clearly live it and breathe it and believe it is just so important. And then just sort of to you, because those who are listening carefully will have noticed I've only talked about one side of a coin. The other side of the coin is using that really rich experience and evidence base, actually, from across sectors to then feed back into government and policy making, which is something that we do quite a lot of and always want to do more of, so that as legislation is developed and as, you know, policy changes, we can say, actually, this is what our members are telling us works and doesn't work. These are the barriers. This is what needs fixing. So we're always keen to do that.
And valuable information comes from the BDF, I would say.
Thank you.
That is very. So my question from this last week, Diane, what was the takeaway from 4 days of amazing guest round tables and conversation? So what's your biggest takeaway?
Takeaways. Well, there were tons, actually. There were lots of really common themes that started coming through from Monday morning and was still coming through. I think it's pretty much exactly an hour ago that we finished. So if I tell you what some of the emerging themes are, so in no particular order, the first one was really around culture, which you'd expect, but specifically this concept of psychological safety. So we launched 2 new reports, one on workplace adjustments globally and one on sharing disability data and collecting disability data globally. And for both those, there was this really strong theme about, you know, the what's in it for me factor, and do the perceived benefits of asking for an adjustment, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk more about adjustments, or for actually sharing a disability or long-term condition as part of data gathering, do those benefits outweigh the risks? So there was this whole thing around creating that safety and a culture where people feel able to be their authentic selves at work and sharing. Second one was about global versus local. So on the one hand, the need to balance a consistent global approach, so particularly in the context of data reporting, to get a kind of good snapshot and comparison of how you're doing in different countries you work, with also the very different local requirements, whether those are as specific as legislation. So in the context of data, the countries where you can or can't or must ask someone if they have a disability, to even things like language or what's culturally appropriate or what kind of resonates on the ground, or even in terms of like adjustments, what suppliers are available, what you could actually do. So there was this, people talked about this real balance of global consistency versus kind of local relevance. Senior leadership, that won't surprise you, as being a huge one. And we also had quite a big theme about people being brave to try. So I had a great fireside chat. Well, it wasn't an actual fireside, but it was a great chat with Claire Barkley, who's the Microsoft UK CEO, yesterday morning. And she was talking about the fact that often senior leaders are worried about getting it wrong, particularly when global language and terminology it can be very different, and it also shifts, and actually approaching things with a positive intent and trying being so important. And I think that's a really strong one. Big focus on storytelling as an enabler, so bringing data to life, but actually enabling people to understand different people's perspective, and in turn that developing culture. An encouraging one on focusing on productivity and inclusion rather than compliance. So talking about collecting data and talking about adjustments, not just in terms of what we must do, but actually about let's give everyone the opportunity to be their best. Let's make sure we can support them to be their best. What else? Well, I think it was Andy Garrett on Monday, firstly, and then Srila Dasgupta from Tata Consulting on Tuesday, who both talked about there being the unexpected positives of the pandemic. And it's pretty much the case. There haven't been many, but one of them that Andy talks about around adjustments was actually forcing some of those questions about trust And all those organisations that had previously said, we don't want people to work from home. We you know, even if they don't specifically say we don't trust you, that just that nervousness of not being able to see your workforce, and that thing about the boss stepping outside the office and seeing the serried ranks of people being productive, although presenteeism is not productivity. And actually some of those things have been forced to change. And just things around, you know, networks and some of these global boundaries not being an issue anymore, and employee resource groups talking to each other from across the world, and then of course tech, and what the difference that's made, and how this is a digital pandemic really. And the one I finished with today as like a kind of call to action really was just this: get started. And it's came across in so many discussions that don't let the fear of not being perfect or not being able to do everything mean that you do nothing. So just try some stuff, just get started. And this quote that came from our Shell report last year, which was focus on intention, not perfection, and giving it a go. And I think that's probably the strongest message from the whole week actually.
I mentioned productivity and inclusion instead of compliance. The Business Disability Forum did that huge case study on Lloyds Banking Group, if you recall, in 2015. I mean, the business drivers why it should be really done on its own as a business as usual rather than because of disability is quite very strongly actually demonstrated in that. Do you think that is actually playing a part in business leaders now, or are they still more worried about making sure they don't fall foul of the legal requirements? So have we moved the dial towards more of a inclusion because you get the best out of your employees, or are we still talking about, oh, we've got to make sure we don't do the wrong thing?
For the organisations that I talk to generally, it's definitely about getting the best out of them employees. And of course, that goes with the major caveat that the businesses that work with us are the ones that really care and really get it. And often the conversations I'm having are with senior people and our partners who are really engaged. And it's very much around talent. One thing I've been really struck by this last week in discussions is them also saying it's morally and ethically the right thing to do. So they're saying this is good for our business, and it's the right thing to do. So it's not only gone beyond compliance, it's gone beyond the bottom line, if you like. And they're seeing this as actually a responsibility of big business in leading the way and driving this, and almost advocating as well, which I find really encouraging. And I said that these are our partners predominantly, and that they are the converted. Interestingly, in the last year, we have recruited loads of members and also lots of partners. And if you told me that a year ago, I would have been very pleasantly surprised, but I would be surprised. So I asked David, you'll know David Goodchild, he's fab, he's our membership director, why are people joining? And they are joining because of the pandemic, not in spite of it. And they are recognizing that there's now an opportunity to recruit differently. They're realizing that actually they can support disabled people in their workplace, and they are seeing that as talent now. So I'm inclined to be optimistic. One of my other colleagues, Ben, calls me Pollyanna, but I prefer to be a glass half full type of a person, especially when it's wine, clearly. But I do feel like there's a real positive shift in what companies are doing and how they're thinking and how they're acting.
I agree with you. Do you agree, Ness?
I agree. I don't want to ask any more questions because I'm taking your questions away. So.
Do you know, I always expected this to be quite off-piste freestyle. I would have been disappointed if it wasn't.
Well, I have got a few more, but I'll wait for my right opportunity.
Let me ask one of my questions. Okay, so what do you think is the most important thing for businesses who are just starting to think about disability inclusion to consider?
See, that's a huge question.
I know.
But I think the first thing is lots of organisations think of disability as being really difficult and tricky and sensitive, and they park it in the too difficult box. So the first thing I'd say is it really doesn't have to be. And of course, organisations like Business Disability Forum and Microlink are here to help. Also that it's part of the human condition, and it's not just about recruitment. So that's really important too. And we might talk about education and talent, and this is a 5-hour webinar, isn't it, right? But I often say to businesses who think it's not maybe not for now, that it's about retention too, and retention of talent in your workforce, and the fact that over 90% of disabilities and long-term conditions are not visible, and the fact that 83% are acquired in working life. If you actually then say that to the business, say you're likely to already be employing and working alongside many more disabled people than you realise, and many of your workforce will acquire a disability. So this is a now issue. It's a you issue. It's really, really relevant. So there's that. There's also the piece about getting started, which I've just talked about, and intentions, not perfection. I also say, it's Earth Day, isn't it? So don't try and boil the ocean. I did make this joke earlier, but clearly I'm very pleased with it, so I'm making it again. It's very bad for climate change, but actually focus on a couple of things, because if you try and fix everything all at once, you won't see change, and it can be, unless you've got an enormous team, obviously, but it's very demoralizing and demotivating when you don't see change. Whereas actually, if you pick 2 or 3 areas perhaps, so our Disability Smart Framework, as you know, has got 10 areas across it, which reflect the fact that we think that getting it right for disabled people is a cross-organisational issue, and it needs a cross-organisational approach. But if you maybe pick a couple of areas to focus on, and then you can see tangible results, then that will really inspire you to do a bit more and helps motivate you. And then in terms of my top 3, so I quite often get asked which my top 3, were you? Okay, my top 3. I
was about to ask that, and your top 3 are? My top 3
are senior leadership, in saying this is what's important to us, to me, this is what we measure, this is what I'm going to be expecting to see. That has a huge difference in driving progress and actually focusing. I mean, that whole business about what's important around here, senior leaders have to drive that. That's the first one. Yep. The second one is line manager confidence. So the confidence of line managers to have a conversation, and the fact that you don't have to be an expert in every condition. You just don't. I often say, if there are 2 things I would like every line manager just to think about, the first is, if somebody responds or acts or looks or presents in a different way to what you're expecting, before you jump to a conclusion, just think, is there something else going on? And the second thing is just to say, what do you need to do your job well? And that's true for everybody. And that sparks a conversation. And then the third thing is really practical support in the shape of a great workplace adjustments process. So those are my 3: senior leadership, line managers, workplace adjustments.
I actually want to add one thing to that. That's absolutely right, because most people take disability as a scary subject, and initially they say, we don't really have any disabled people, because no one tells us about the disability. And second part is, okay, we know, but we don't know what to do with it. And thirdly, they say, it costs a lot of money to fix it. People often focus on that top 10% of very difficult cases. They forget the 90% are easy to be fixed. And when they ask me what we do, the best way I can summarize what we do is to say we are in talent recovery business, not disability, because we have a toolbox, and we provide the right tools to people who are struggling to do their work because of their condition. Disability doesn't play a part in it. It's all about giving them the right tools, the right skill, the right training, so that they can do their job they used to do, but now with the health condition overlay. So I think that's really the easiest one to say, is that disability is not such a scary subject if you look at it as providing people the right tool to do the job they love to do. Yeah, absolutely. That's our job. We do that, and it's and because we've done it, and you know about the adjustments are so sometimes so simple and so cheap that sometimes it doesn't even barely come out of the petty cash, because people can get back to do their work without actually having to raise too much of a fuss. Yeah, I think the mystery is solved.
I'd like to think so. I like talent recovery. I really like talent recovery. It's great.
But we had honestly, this is the truth about one manager that I used to deal with. He only realized he was dyslexic when I was chatting to him, and about 6 months later, he got his first promotion in 3 years, and then he got a second one about a year later. All he had to do is to go and tell his people he needed some help with his dyslexia. And when I asked him, what does that mean for you now? He said, oh, I work twice. I don't have to work twice as hard anymore because I used to really work harder than anybody else. Now I'm more relaxed. I do my job. So all it had to be, one, recognize it wasn't him. It's a condition that he couldn't help. And two, he managed to do the things he couldn't do using some of the tools that I mentioned.
People still worry about saying no, don't they? I can remember talking to someone who was on a graduate scheme. This is a few years ago now because it was an actual event, you know, the ones where you leave your house and you meet people. Those were great. And she said to me, she was partway through a graduate recruitment program. And the next stage was an online test, but it was timed. And she was genuinely in a quandary about whether to tell the recruiter that she had dyslexia, because she said, if I tell them I've got dyslexia and ask for more time for the test, will there be a negative mark against my application? Will they take that against me? But conversely, if I don't tell them, I know I'll do really badly in the test. And this is maybe 2-3 years ago. And it was this genuine dilemma. And this is someone who's just come out of university. And what a terrible thing to have to be worried about.
And we find that we have a large number of clients that we help with the workplace adjustment, and we find very few graduates actually ask for help. And there was a research, I'm sure you're aware of this, in higher education, that a vast majority of graduates with disabilities who get fantastic support in university using disabled student allowance don't actually ask for help when they go into employment. That's a real terrible thing. They've got everything they need. They've got their coping strategies. They've got the tools, but they actually don't use it because they're afraid of the consequences.
The stigma.
Yeah.
Or the no.
Well, the stigma and even the perceived stigma, because even if it isn't real, if it's real in your head that you'll suffer a detriment by asking for support or sharing a condition, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Which is where this point about psychological safety comes in.
And I think it is encouraging people to be more brave and think the best rather than the worst. Because, you know, if you think you're not going to get a job because of your disability, then probably you won't. But if you go, you know, I think it is being brave. I've noticed that over my 7 years of working at Microlink. I've seen that that hidden thing come now more, well, yes, I have dyslexia, or yes, I have, you know, especially neurodiverse conditions, they tend to be a little more brave now because the market is a little more mature.
I feel the government has an important role here to play in terms of making sure that journey is joined up, because this issue of university and then going to workplace, we need to really do better in transitioning. And that's something that I think BDF has been playing a really good, important role in that. And I think, again, this is where the DWP and DFE have the same common issue, but they don't seem to have that continuity of journey. So they should really get together and try to figure out how to get people coming out of university straight into employment without the fears that you just mentioned, and also with the support. They carry their support with them. It will cost hardly anything. It's just make sure that people are aware of the support they have, and they can carry on using what has made them successful in the university.
Absolutely. And one of the things I think you probably know, NASA, is that we have been sort of asking for this Tech for Life model. I think the National Disability Strategy is due out, and as part of our submission, we argued that the cap for both disabled students' allowance and access to work should be removed, because, as you rightly said, NASA, the vast majority of adjustments are not very expensive, but for a few people, they are really expensive, but a very small number. And if the cap for access to work was removed, then those people, and generally people who rely on human support, such as deaf people who need a sign language interpreter, would open up so many opportunities for them. So I think from a moral and ethical standpoint, that is absolutely vital. But just a joining up of DSA and access to work, because as you say, you don't get to take that with you. So arguably the most important point in your life of transitioning from education to employment, you suddenly have the support structure taken away from you. You're having to apply for a job when you don't have the things that you relied on in academia, and without even the guarantee that you'll get them should you get the job. I mean, that's really damaging. And I'm saying this as an adult at the grand age of 48. When I was 21, my goodness, that would have been, I would have felt almost sort of hopeless, actually. I couldn't possibly do that.
I have first-hand experience of family members who I've tried to get them to apply for access to DSA, and it's hard to convince them. Once they do, you can't get them off it. But then they worry about they worry about employment and the kind of the perception of the employers. But one thing you mentioned earlier about the maybe one of the positives of COVID, if you can say it's positive, but maybe something we learn to live with, is technology. Now, you're mentioning, for example, that deaf people need BSL. Previously, it was obviously hard because you need to book them in 3-hour slots and they need to be on location. But in the past year, it's amazing how technology is coming to the aid of the people. Now you can have video BSL. They're not maybe as good as the present in person, but certainly it's actually removed a lot of that cost barriers. So you can get a lot more done in 1-hour slots rather than block of 3 hours or 4 hours. And that could help the budgets. And I think I've seen that in many areas where people easier for them to book the interpreters, whereas previously, if you were let down by one interpreter due to whatever circumstances, the whole day was wasted for everyone. But now, it's much quicker to arrange. And there are some other new technologies for guiding blind people navigating independently rather than having a helper. Again, these are online. You've got the Be My Eye or something as called ERA. These are the technologies that can come into the help of people to be more independent with both their work and living.
Yeah, and just the leaps and bounds by which platforms like Microsoft Teams have come on in terms of accessibility features, and being able to have captioning and actually these built-in things that you can just switch on. Although I should say that no captioning is as good as live captioning. And you said I'm tired. I'm sure that our friends at My Clear Text are tired because they have been following us all week. So a huge thanks to them. But there's also been some quite interesting stuff. So I know I actually referred someone to you, Nasser, recently who happened to contact me on LinkedIn and say that they had started a job, a senior level job in a business during lockdown. And this person was talking about having a particular hearing impairment that they'd had since birth, and actually found communication like this on Zooms or Team with a really decent headset and with captions fine, but was really worried about going back to the office and those side conversations, and about people saying, let's have a walk and talk meeting, or let's meet in the pub, and actually how to kind of self-advocate, but also think of some of the kind of different technological solutions that were possible. So that was really interesting.
Well, thankfully, with regards to assistive technology, there's so many options. I don't believe there is any condition that it can't be helped with assistive technology. I mean, we've been doing it for 30 years. So if you imagine 30 years ago, voice recognition wasn't like Dragon or what you get in Microsoft nowadays. But people still manage to get by. But certainly hearing loss or hearing impaired people, there are so many solutions for them to be able to actually compensate for that loss of hearing. So technology has been a winner, in my opinion, when it comes to this issue of disability and how you could make people more productive. And obviously the past 12 months added additional tools that it's now free. Teams is absolutely a great example, but there are lots of others that I've seen that would actually help people within the workplace to do what they want to do without having to get any help because it's built into their technology. Just go to your office and Office 365 and start voice dictating. Don't need to buy Dragon anymore. But, you know, in a way, I think there is a positive, and people now recognizing the productivity aspect of it, and disability is just kind of taking a background seat, and, you know, but we still need to raise that issue.
We do, but it's just a greater acceptance, isn't it, of different ways of working, different, you know, different technology, different platforms, different times, different styles. And we had quite a lot this week in the symposium about work being something you do rather than somewhere you go as well, which I quite liked.
Can I go back to my question?
Yes, please, Anna.
Because this is an important one. So we were very pleased and proud to support the BDF's Great Big Workplace Adjustment Survey in 2019, which drew on the experiences of over 1,200 disabled people. Can you tell us a bit about that survey and what it showed? I mean, I know we've touched on lots of things already, but...
Well, we called it the Great Big Workplace Adjustment Survey, and it kind of does what it says on the tin. It's based on completed responses from 1,200 disabled people. So we went out to our members and partners and beyond and basically said, if you have a disability, you know, tell us about your experience of working with adjustments or not, and getting them or not. And we produced a big report, which I won't attempt to summarize, but some of the key stats. So 80% said their adjustments had helped them stay in their job and helped them be more productive. And over beyond that, so that's being productive and effective, 60% just enjoyed their job more, which I thought was lovely. There were some less good ones though, and the two that really struck me and continue to strike me, the first is 8%, only 8%, but still 8% of respondents waited 2 or more years for adjustments. And you know, obviously there were the sliding scale of how quickly people got adjustments, but it always makes me think of when you start a job and you feel like a spare part because no one's actually really shown you what to do, and maybe you're given a pile of reading, or maybe you have a load of meetings, and actually being desperate to kind of get in and doing and being productive, and that's usually for, say, a few days for most of us. Imagine if that was 2 years. What must that do to you in terms of your morale, your self-confidence, how the rest of the team perceive you? So that's one. The other one, or two actually, 34% of employees did not ask for adjustments, even if they needed them, because they were frightened that their manager would treat them differently. And that figure was almost identical for people who said that they were afraid their colleagues would treat them differently. And I've been starting to reframe that as that means that over a third of people who responded, and it was pretty big sample size, were not as effective as possible, were not as productive as possible, were probably covering and expending their energy on that rather than doing the job, just because they were afraid of the reaction of asking. So yeah, so those ones really, really struck me.
So I would say 34% of the workforce were unhappy as well, apart from everything else.
Yeah.
And from everything we hear, actually it was great data from Accenture that the most engaging organizations, the most inclusive one, are 8 times more profitable compared to the ones who are not. So what else do business leaders need to see in order to, you know, call for action and say, let's sort this out? I mean, the great Mark Fisher's words, I don't care about disability. I want to make sure my people can do the best they can. So I ask them, what is it you can't do? And we'll help you to do it. And that philosophy still exists in some of the great companies that we work with.
Yeah.
Remove barriers. They don't care about disability. Yeah. And disability is something you can't help, or health condition you can't help. All you can do, you can actually reduce the disability, but not making the working conditions so difficult.
Yeah, and that whole point about barriers is so important. So the recommendations we had at the end were focus on barriers not conditions, which also goes back to the thing about not having to be an expert. Also remembering that processes are about people. So you have a brilliant process on paper, but if it's not a good experience for the employee, if the line manager doesn't respond well, if they're afraid of how the line manager will respond, all those things, that can mean that something that looks wonderful on paper does not translate in real life. Also a piece about language, and it not being the language of occupational health or HR or medical, but actually just about, again, practically what support people need. And we also found an important kind of reminder that an organisation that's put in an adjustment for an employee may need to remember that won't necessarily help them wherever they work. Yeah. So you might have an accessible workstation or whatever, but other parts of the building, other buildings in the organisation or whatever it is may still be totally inaccessible, which of course is why inclusive design is so important. And then this is my favorite one, which links to what you said. The key finding was, when the right adjustments are in place, employees stay in their job, are productive and are happy. Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't want that?
Absolutely. Something really important struck me. When you ask people to disclose, what are you trying to gain by saying, well, disclose you're disabled? And one of the questions from I think somebody presented it in the round table yesterday. The question they asked, how many of you are disabled? And is that impacting your work? So if you have a condition, which is legally speaking, you are disabled if it's more than 12 months. But if it doesn't impact on your day-to-day, then what's the point of disclosing it? I don't need any help, so I won't need to tell you. So I always find two types of organizations have the lowest disclosure. One, the ones who provide everything to remove barriers without asking questions. Mm. The other ones are the ones who don't do anything. Because one, they say, well, why should I tell them? Because they won't help me. The other one says, well, why should I tell them? I'm already getting what I want. So there's no point telling them I'm disabled. So I think this whole focus on barrier is absolutely the key to try to resolve the conversation about disability, at least in UK, because I think we are much more mature than the rest of the world when it comes to that conversation.
You're absolutely right. Michael Vermeersch of Microsoft told me that curve that you see is called a Gaussian curve. So I like to try and remember that. But that is exactly the point. If you offer everybody flexible working, if you have self-service assistive technology, if you have allow people to work from home or have time off for carers leave or whatever it is, just a standard, then you reduce the need for someone to ask for it and then to tell you why they're asking for it. So, yeah, which is why the data monitoring piece is, of course, so complex when it comes to disability.
Yeah.
So back to my list.
Back to your list. Sorry, Anna.
I'm jumping a few because we're kind of covering it, so I don't want to, of course, repeat ourselves.
We try not to do that, don't we, Nessa?
No, I was going to ask you, do you have anything project going that you want another sponsorship? Because we have a proud history of sponsoring some of your great reports. So if you are thinking of another groundbreaking, earth-shattering research work, then we are your friends and you're our friends. So.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Thank you, Nessa. I shall follow that up with you.
Especially, I heard about accessibility, building accessibility when people come back to work. Maybe that's something we certainly think needs focusing on. Anyway,
sorry, Anna.
Please, Anna.
Back to me, please, me. I know you're busy. So, okay. What do workplace adjustments look like in 2021 in the context of this brave new world?
Well, Anna, I am delighted to say that today we are launching with you our new resource. This is one I printed off, so it's not as pretty as it will be, really. Adjust Our Workplaces 2021. So we created the Adjust Our Workplaces report 2 years ago, and we wanted to see kind of what that looks like now. So in the context of the pandemic, and as we start to move back to offices, to workplaces, although of course not everyone has ever gone away from them. So really looking at specific considerations post-COVID. So we did a survey a year ago now at the start of what we thought was going to be a very short lockdown before we went back to normal. But even then, 90% of our members who responded said that they thought that COVID was resulting in a lasting change in attitudes to flexible and home working. And you'll know that before the pandemic, home working was the most frequently requested workplace adjustment.
Yeah.
And even then, almost 2/3 are recognising the increased demand and adjustments for all staff to be able to work in a different way. And we're starting to train line managers in managing remotely and spot the signs that perhaps someone wasn't coping. So some of the things that we talk about in this Adjust Our Workplaces 2021 short paper with a forward from NASA is about, as we go back, trying to create the best of both worlds, not the worst of both.
Yeah.
So, and by that I mean, for example, not making people choose where they have adjustments. So if we're going to move towards a hybrid model of work, which most organisations I'm talking to at the moment are saying we're going to do that, we're going to do part in the office, part at home. Well, if people have an adjustment in one space, they need it in the other as well. It's not reasonable to expect people to be carrying, you know, an ergonomic keyboard or a sit-stand desk or whatever with them, but actually bearing that in mind, because otherwise they'll have to make a choice, and then you run the risk of creating a two-tier workforce of those who are able to come in and those who aren't. And I think it's really important that we remember what it was like pre-pandemic. You know, those times when there would be the majority of people in the room and maybe a couple on speakerphone or on Teams or Zoom, and actually getting forgotten and not being able to participate as fully. So we've got some of our members saying any meeting that is 5 people or more will automatically do on an online platform so that everyone can contribute. It's those sorts of things, but I'm just rushing back. I also think there's a really important thing about senior leaders. So I was on a round table. They're always round tables, aren't they? Always round, an oval table. But of course it was virtual a few weeks ago. And we were talking about that, and somebody said, do we need to be specific about when people come in or what happens? And someone else said, these are all HR people. Well, we're all adults, can't we all just decide for ourselves? And I said, well, I don't think so, no. And because if as senior people we say, we'd like all of you to work flexibly. We'd like you to come into the office maybe a couple of days a week, but please work from home the rest of the time, you know, work out what's best for you. But if then you as a senior leader immediately start going back to your lovely office Monday to Friday and being there from 9 till 5 or probably 8 till 6 or whatever it is, you're completely undermining the message that it's okay to work like that. So it's so important. And I also think we need to make sure that, kind of conversely from not letting people work from home, that businesses don't go, well, we'll employ someone disabled and we don't have to make any adjustments in the office space because they can just work from home now, because that is not inclusive and could be discriminatory. So, you know, all these sorts of considerations. And then at the beginning,
a person's working from,
yeah,
they have to make it. So it's workspace adjustments, not workplace adjustments.
Yes, very well put. Workspace adjustments, and also practicing what you preach as a senior leader. And if you expect people to do a hybrid model, then you need to do it yourself.
Well, I'm definitely working from home. I find it much more productive, but I'm sure I'll be dragged into the office. So, Anna?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Hang on. What do you hope to see as we build back better?
I'd like to see us building back better consciously. I'm now thinking about Gwyneth Paltrow, consciously uncoupling, but consciously going back rather than just slipping back into old ways. So choosing to go back to what was good, but also choosing to keep what is good about how we're working now. And that's going to be different for different people. And I think it's also about respecting that individuals will be at different stages in terms of their health, actually. And I think it's quite interesting thinking about who's disabled now, because you could be a wheelchair user and not be any more susceptible to COVID. Whereas if you have an autoimmune condition or respiratory condition, you might never have had to think of yourself as being disabled, never tell your employer, but now you might have to shield. So I think that's really important. And this piece about inclusive design as a default, so avoiding unintended consequences. And some of the really sad things I think we've seen in the past year have been abuse of people who can't socially distance, perhaps because they're blind or because they can't measure distances accurately, of people who can't wear face masks or need to remove it to lip read. So I think just designing things consciously as well is really important. But I hope that we can work differently and flexibly, and also globally now. I think that kind of genie is out of the bottle. So I don't think we should try and stuff it back in.
No, my quick suggestion is to get all the disabled people to teach the typical people, non-disabled people, how to be resilient, because they've built that over years. In the past year, so-called normal people actually became disabled overnight. Now they're struggling, some of them. Musculoskeletal is on the rise, huge ones, and people with mental health. And I think they could go to the community of disabled people. How did you cope? Let's learn from you. Somebody wants to ask a question, Hannah.
I saw that, because we are actually in the Q&A time.
Are we?
I do just want to say that we've got the annual conference coming up, the BDF annual conference, and we've got the Disability Smart Awards, and there'll be a resource page being sent out with all links to all the guides and reports and everything. We will make sure that everybody on the call gets all the reports that have been mentioned. There's so many more questions.
And Microlink is still the sponsor of the awards, right?
Pardon?
And Microlink is the sponsor of the awards, I take it. Is that correct?
We love BDF.
There you go.
We love the work you do. And I think the two of us coexisting on the planet works.
I think it does too. Somebody asked for the link to the Workplace 2021 report. It's more of a paper than a report, but I've just posted it into the chat.
Yeah, so it's there. But I've got it also on the resource page.
So the relationship is called symbiotic relationship. So we love BDF, they love us. So that love
That's nice.
Growing. So I don't know if we can get Gavin to actually ask the question. I don't know. I'll have to ask Azadeh, our behind the scenes guru. Can we put Gavin Hool live so we can ask a question to Diane or me or Nasser? Well, not me.
No, well,
yes, just
okay.
a minute, please.
Okay, we're working on it, Gavin. Just be patient. Just find your name and activate you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Gavin, we can hear you. Great
session. I've been just listening into your dialogue and what's going on and the way the world is right now. And I did ping you a message on LinkedIn, Diane. So
oh, great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
I've got everything shut because of bandwidth at the moment, but I'll look.
Yeah, sure. We'll connect another time. But I was just thinking about, at the moment, I'm an academic at London South Bank University, and I've been just, are you folks familiar with URSA?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you're all familiar with it. So I'm on URSA. I was on URSA's forum this morning. It's still going on this afternoon. But really the youth, social mobility and that kind of thing. Well, really what's going on, I'm just interested in your views on youth social mobility from the world of school into the world of work. And there's not a lot of advice and guidance going on right now due to school budget cuts and that. I'm also a teacher, by the way, and I have a history, my background's a mechanical engineer. I got into this kind of design of a transition for youth, and that's what my current paper is about, a youth transition and what that looks like. I'm also autistic, dyspraxic, and I'm dyslexic. So I'm just interested in what does good look like for youth transition from school into the world of work for yourselves?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. We don't do a lot of that in my current job, but I used to work for a learning disability organisation, and what worked well there in transition was a blended approach from education to employment. So particularly where kind of final college years also included a vocational element, because too often students with special educational needs, and this is going back a few years, but it's 4 years ago, were shipped off to special colleges and not really given vocational training that was keeping pace with what employers were looking for, let alone having any actual exposure to employment and work experience and job opportunities. So that's from my previous experience, and that was something that worked well. And then also applying the learning from college into what that might look like in terms of independent living, and also work skills, if that makes sense. And then currently, Anna did say, I'm chair of the Disabled Student Stakeholder Group, which is very specifically about student finance. But I think there's a lot that could be done, that needs to be done around joining up support, not just DSA to access to work, but actually final year of education, much better vocational support, because it's so variable and so patchy. So those are some thoughts.
Gavin, I personally think the biggest change we need to have in education is teachers becoming more comfortable with assistive technology, because it could be such an amazing enabler for young people to be able to become independent learners. And if you don't have that confidence amongst the teaching profession, it's very hard to get the young children to embrace technology. And we've worked in some schools, and the impact is just amazing. They just they become more confident. They actually start engaging with their class, with their classmates, and once you get that going, that's a pipeline for the future workforce. We need to actually start this conversation about assistive technology at a much younger age, talking about secondary school onwards. But that comes from teachers. They should learn how to operate it, and by that they could teach the children to be using technology to be more independent, especially the ones with neurodiversity.
I'd just like to interrupt you with, and just add to your point there, Nash, that the issue is that with only about, say, because I'm a teacher as well, but I would say only of your PGCE, you're only spending about 10% of your time actually dealing with SEND in the whole of your PGCE.
Totally.
So that the whole of your PGCE needs to be really extended into SEND, and thus grow familiar with the assistive technology, just as you would within companies today. You'll know, like was commented earlier with Microsoft. I know the gentleman from Microsoft, and I do speak to him occasionally. But where we've got assistive technology as standard across large companies where they can afford these licenses, we should have standardization of these assistive technologies from the get-go. There is theory in place in education where people, by their nature, are self-directing, self-steering. And unfortunately, we live in a community where there's communities that are siloed. There's not community of practice and shared practice.
I think, Gavin, we have obviously time we're getting there. We could have an offline conversation. The technology is already in schools. It's free. They should use it. The confidence is not there. So teachers need to spend more time learning. And there is a DFE is doing that at the moment. They have got some projects with assistive technology in schools and hubs. I hope that this would be a great moment because of the past year, because of reliance on technology. I hope the teachers will now embrace the assistive technology, which is built into everything we do these days. And, Alexa is an example. You can do everything by voice, and you can do things by text-to-speech. Those are the tools, those 20% of the students who struggle with neurodiversity could benefit from, and could actually help them come out of education with something that they can transfer to workplace. Anyway,
thank you,
Anna. It's your final.
Well, we're wrapping up. I can't see any other questions. I mean, lots of requests, of course, for all the reports and papers, and I have been pulling out your sound bites, Nasser and Diane, as we've been going. I think it's the first time I've done that, because usually I'm talking much more, but you were talking, so I could do it.
Sorry.
That was very good. So I've pulled out lots of stuff, but there will be a resource page sent out afterwards, along with the transcript and all Diane's contact details and everything, the work of the BDF, and of course everything that we do. And if anybody wants to get in touch, you can do that. Just email us. You can find that on our website or our email addresses, wherever.
And I have to say, a big high five to Diane. She had an amazing week.
Oh, thank you.
And she deserves a break. Tomorrow you could take a day off. I'll tell your colleagues not to bother you.
Okay,
Are you
okay,
off
you let them know.
tomorrow?
Yeah,
Have you got a day off
I'm
tomorrow?
not. I could probably finish a bit early, but no, I'm working tomorrow. But
how are you? But well, I thought maybe could you focus on doing your decoration and you know your paint.
yeah,
But
it does kind of need it.
you deserve a break anyway. Thank you again
Thank you.
for
Yeah.
taking
It
part in
was a
this
really wonderful
series.
webinar.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you both.
Thank you. And next week, Anna, who's coming to our show?
Deborah Rue.
Deborah, our good friend Deborah from America, and she's a phenomenal lady for accessibility. And so
Sure
next
is.
week, same time, Deborah Rue.
See you there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you very much.
We all love you.
Bye.
Thank you.
We love you
Bye.
too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.